This is Creative Banter, a creativity and philosophy-focused podcast hosted by Cody Schultz and Ben Horn. As we find ourselves nearing the end of 2022, we enter the typical period of self-reflection, looking back on what we had accomplished, as well as what we wish to get done come the new year. For myself, that includes the completion of a large ebook and perhaps the creation of a few presentations. For Ben, it means maintaining his status as a full-time photographer, figuring out the intricate balance which is required by such a career. Our conversation spans the topics of retail jobs and Black Friday, money as a motivating factor, sponsorships and obvious ad placements in TV shows and movies. And speaking of movies, we discuss a viewer-suggested topic from our Discord. Speaking of Discord, Ben and I will be discussing large format in the next episode. If you have any questions regarding how to get started, what gear we recommend, or any other general inquiries, please head over to the Discord channel linked below to let us know. And with that, let's dive right into it, shall we? Of course, my mother's making loud noises right outside my window here as she's hanging up Christmas lights. So,
well, not long ago, my neighbor was mowing the lawn, but that has completed now. So,
well, that's good. Yeah. I actually found for this past episode, they have this tool in Audacity under the effects. Where is it? Or what do they call it? Something about noise. Yeah, noise reduction.
Mm-hmm.
And I started using that last week because we had all of that wind movement and everything.
Work out pretty well?
I seem to have, at least.
That's good.
Because you just select where that noise is that you want to get rid of, and it did a pretty solid job on it.
Yeah.
I was quite impressed.
I have that in Adobe Audition, and I do use that as well. Kind of sample the silence areas, and it figures out whatever the bass noise is in the background and cancels that out. So yeah, that's a nice feature to have. Cleans it up.
Just shows that there's a lot more to learn about doing this stuff than I already have, which makes it more fun, more interesting.
Yeah.
But it gives me a goal to have for 2023 too.
Yes, very very timely as we're reaching toward the end of this year. We still have some time to go, but definitely important to be looking forward to next year and whatever goals we might have along the way when it comes to photography and such along those lines. So do you have anything in mind that you're planning on doing for next year?
The primary goal right now is the ebook that I had mentioned last episode.
Mm-hmm.
I want to make sure that I get that finished up. I was actually working on it a decent bit this past weekend. I think I got one section for the most part completed, which is good. And I think that's just going to be how it goes. Each week, kind of get one section of it done, and eventually it will be finished up pretty easily at that point. So I want to get that finished because that will be a very big project, big weight lifted off my shoulders, but very enjoyable experience to have that done.
Yeah, get that sense of completion.
Yeah, for sure. Other than that, I want to revamp my website. I've been slowly working on that. The ebook kind of took priority for now, but I want to redo that. There's some things with SEO that I want to delve into a little bit more. I want to make the website, especially for the podcast, because I know a couple of people at least listen to the podcast through my website.
Mm-hmm.
And for those that are listening through the website, I apologize because I am absolutely terrible at throwing the podcast episodes up onto my website in a timely manner.
Yeah, because you have to do that manually, right?
Yeah, it's a pain how how it works out, because Squarespace and Anchor, who we host with, don't exactly like playing together very nicely. And so each week I have to try and remember, okay, now on Wednesdays I have to throw this episode up in a manual manner, which it's a pain, but I have an idea of how to go about doing it in the future, but I want to redo the website first and then tackle that. I think I'll do it in a blog post fashion. That way I can, as soon as the episode is done, I can streamline it, so I'll have the early release on Patreon for Mondays. Then I'll have that's scheduled out, and then I'll have it scheduled for Anchor to be released on Wednesdays for public release.
Mm-hmm.
And at that same time, I'll be able to schedule out this blog post, so that way I don't have to worry about remembering about it.
Yeah.
So that's the next big project, because that'll take some time to finagle everything. But other than that, there really isn't a ton of different goals. I mean, obviously, want to go camping more often again.
Yeah, you had so many trips last year that didn't work out for one reason or another.
Yeah, I already have plans of going back up to Acadia in June, I believe. I'm going to start planning that out, figuring out where exactly I'm going to be staying. There's actually an island up there that you can camp on for, I don't remember if it's 3 nights or 5 nights. And it's completely secluded. Like the only way
how do you get to it? Is it like take a boat in or something like that?
Yeah, you have to take a boat into it. So you just have whatever like pack you have, or whatever you have packed in your backpack is what you bring with you.
Wow, that's cool.
It's just really difficult to reserve, because you can only reserve it once per year for those X amount of days at max. And a ton of people want to do it. So
is it like kayaks or canoes, or is it more like a some sort of small ferry, or like how is it that you get across?
Small ferry, from my understanding. Okay. Yeah. So I think you can visit it like as a daily kind of thing, but it'd be so much more enjoyable just to be there, and especially because of when we are going to be going. It's going to be bordering the 4th of July.
Mm-hmm.
So I would really like to have that spot for a couple of days and not have to worry about a ton of people surrounding me in the campsite and all of those other hikes. So we'll see how that goes. And then
and I would think it would be a different sort of crowd that would want to go to a destination like that versus some of the more, popular and very accessible campground areas.
Yeah.
So
it
sounds like that'd be a great experience.
And then on top of that, my dad and I are trying to plan out a trip to Colorado. So the one guy, I don't know if I mentioned it before, but he's our neighbor up at the cabin, and he owns properties out in Colorado that he does that he rents out.
Mm-hmm.
And he's big into riding motorcycles. Him and his wife have ridden cross country on the motorcycles before. So we're trying to plan that out, where we'd go out there for like 2 or 3 weeks, probably 3 weeks, drive out with the bikes and really enjoy everything.
That's kind of cool. What's the longest that you've gone on bikes before? I mean, that's a long ways to go.
We would trailer them out. We want to.
Okay.
Yeah. There's
I was about
no
to say,
way.
because that's an adventure.
I would be able to do it on a personal basis, but there's no way my dad would.
Yeah.
Just because it gets uncomfortable. I mean, even a 5-6 hour ride, I think, is the longest that we've done. Yeah. And the breaks that you have to take, it tears down your body real quick.
I imagine. Plus, you have to be far more vigilant than in a car, where you can just kind of like go a little bit on autopilot. It does. I can't imagine that works is quite the same. When you're watching out for everyone else that's not watching out for you, and you can't zone out in quite the same way.
Exactly. Yeah. But going back to goals, I mean, other than those, I've been talking about doing a calendar for years now, but just haven't been able to find a printer that will offer me the design that I want at a price that I can reach. So maybe this will be the year. Then again, maybe not.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I don't really think there's, at least not right now that I know of. That's pretty much my year. It'll be interesting to see what happens after student teaching once that ends in May, and where life takes me from there. Whether that means I just find a full-time job, retail or something, or if I go into teaching and do that for a few years or whatever. But
does the student teaching oftentimes lead to jobs doing that, or is it like I'm unfamiliar with how? I know that some cases when you start kind of going in that direction, it like funnels you into a career path pretty steadily. How does it work out for like the student teaching and all that?
Unfortunately, it doesn't work out near as well as you may think, or near as well as like some internships work out. Like at least if you get, say, a marketing degree, you intern at a place for 6 months or whatever, there's a pretty decent likelihood that you'll get hired by that company that you're interning from. With student teaching, no, it doesn't correlate. Plus, the other thing that you have to keep in mind is where I am student teaching is not at all a school that I would want to work at. It's in an area that is not the demographic that I want to deal with, not the type of students or parents that I want to deal with, kind of thing. It's one of the lower ends, what they consider Title I schools, so it's a poorer school. And while there's nothing wrong with that, I just know that for me, it's not right. So I have to keep that in consideration. But I have to go to this school to student teach because it's a urban development kind of program for this master's. So
yeah, and the other thing I was thinking is, I don't know how much of this was affected at where you are, but I mean, at least in some of the areas here, like in California, I know that there's, in some cases, there were situations where people were kind of on the verge of retirement before, the pandemic. And then once that hit, some people were kind of like, cool, I'm done. I'm out of here. I'm close enough to retirement already. And I also kind of wonder, like with teaching, whether so many of those, the people that were close to retirement have been kind of like shaken out, where you have perhaps less positions now in some ways, because maybe some of the people that do have those teaching positions, they're in it more for the long run now, whereas that may not have been the case a little while back. So it does make me wonder if that will have an effect on maybe having less availability of teaching jobs now that we're mostly beyond the pandemic, or if that'll have any sort of impact on anything at all.
I go back and forth in my opinion on what they consider the teacher shortage the past 2 years, because you hear everybody say, "Oh, we need teachers. All these teachers are retiring because they don't want to deal with the repercussions of COVID and the different teaching strategies that you had to then employ." But then you also look at some of my peers who have graduated recently and still can't find a job teaching in the local districts. Or if they do, it's a long-term substitute position. It's not a contracted position.
Yeah.
So it's difficult to say for sure whether there is a true teacher shortage, or if it's a way for schools to bring in new teachers at a lower pay, because they're now offering, instead of contracts, they're offering long-term sub positions, which you don't get the benefits, you don't get the same vacation or sick time, you don't get the same pay rate, you also aren't classed in the union, from my understanding at least. So there's a lot that goes into it that you can kind of see schools could be a little sneakier than what you may want them to be.
Yeah.
So, but
Yeah.
like I said, I
I
don't
could
know
totally
for
see
sure.
that would be the case.
I can't say.
Yeah.
I can only say from my limited experience in
Yeah.
my small area. So, I mean, it'll be interesting to see what happens come my time to graduate and potentially get a career in teaching, whether that's contracted or LTS or whatever.
And you had also had mentioned, a job in retail as well. So I did that for a long time from 2004 through 2020. And so we're recording this on a Tuesday before Thanksgiving. And as someone who worked from 2004 through 2020 at a camera store, I always dreaded that day after Thanksgiving. There was nothing good to come from that. So just mentioning that just made me thankful that I can do this now, though I have tons of respect for people that are going to be working very, very hard over the coming weeks and month or so with what's ahead. Was there anything you had in mind when you had mentioned retail?
Ironically enough, there's a camera shop near me that I think I mentioned off air before, that they've been hiring for some kind of technical position in the back kind of deal, scanning film, working with film or whatever.
That sounds to me like lab work stuff like that. That's different than the sort of the outward facing, the more retail type stuff.
I've worked retail before. I worked at grocery stores. I've worked at restaurants. I've dealt with people plenty, but I'm curious to see how things have changed over the years, even since you got out of retail, regarding Black Friday and the sales around it and everything, because now it's not just one day. Now it's like 3 months. Like you've seen Black Friday deals since like beginning of October already.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's so overused and overblown to the point where when I hear that now, I'm just kind of like, all right, this is just like, I don't even pay attention to any of that anymore. I think we're kind of collectively over it, but like the marketers are still thinking that that's their way, to get attention. But I think people, for the most part, are just kind of like tuning it out. But speaking of camera stores and such, I was thinking about when it comes to my priorities, not priorities, but maybe thinking ahead to next year. Some of it was actually a little bit. It has to do with a little bit with where I used to work and all that. So basically, as we've talked about in past episodes, when we're talking about motivations behind why we do what we do, for me, money has never really been a huge motivating factor, and probably to my own detriment to a certain degree. But thinking back to when I used to work at the camera store, the way it was set up, about half the income or so, maybe a little bit more than half, would come from just hourly wages. And then the other sizable chunk of the income would come from payments from the manufacturers. And so if one were to sell a Canon camera, you can turn in that receipt to Canon, and then they give you some money for selling it.
Interesting.
And the same is true for Sony and for Nikon. And not all camera stores are this way, but a lot of them are, where it's kind of the manufacturers basically bribe the people who are behind the counter. And I gotta say, I was always very uncomfortable with that. I didn't like that that sense of motivation behind it. And there's always some people that are highly motivated by that. And, that will lead them to recommend one thing or another. But I just, that just wasn't me. It didn't appeal to me. And for the last, I never really got into it too much, but especially toward the end of the time that I was working at the camera store, I didn't turn any of that stuff in. So I was just like leaving a lot of stuff on the table, but I felt so much better about it that way. And it reminds me heavily of the whole like influencer culture, which is kind of the same thing, where, the manufacturers are paying basically to promote their product, but it leads to perhaps less genuine recommendations and advice and stuff like that along those lines.
Especially in the YouTube realm, where one year they have a video out, switching from Canon to Sony, and then you have another video of switching from Sony to Fuji, and then the next couple months down the line it's Fuji to Nikon, and back and forth and all over the place. And while I understand wanting from a photographic standpoint the best gear that you could possibly get, at the same time, how can you even recommend something that you've only worked with for a few months and genuinely tell your viewers, your subscribers, this is the best of the best? Because at some point you just lose any trust that I had in you, or any like authenticity.
Yeah, exactly. And that's one of the reasons why I always steer away from, if anyone puts videos on YouTube and has been there for long enough, you're going to get all these emails from companies, offering, paid reviews and all kinds of stuff like that. It just, to me, that whole thing is just feels kind of icky to me. So I don't even respond to them. Occasionally I'll post screenshots of some of the more ludicrous ones on my my parody Instagram account, Wilderness Influencer, and people kind of enjoy that because but it's something where I've never felt good about any of that kind of stuff, and I think that's one of the reasons why for me, money isn't very much a motivating factor, because when it does become a motivating factor, it's often someone else pulling the strings and it's being motivated for the wrong reasons. But I've been thinking a little bit about the way I do things with my own photography and thinking ahead to 2023, that now that I'm doing my own thing and I'm not, I'm not going down the road of, paid reviews and stuff like that, perhaps income should be a little bit of a higher priority for me. And because it's one of the few ways that I think I do have the ability to measure progress, but not so much as like, oh man, I want to, get that $200,000, Sprinter van or whatever, So it's not out of greed, but just as a sense of curiosity, as a sense of having some sort of goal setting. It's probably also inspired by the fact that, this has been a little bit of a tougher year, just from the standpoint everything's getting more expensive, yet I'm also making a little bit less than I have in the past years. So I think what this is going to do is it's going to help me to perhaps become a bit more efficient with what I do, and look at ways to perhaps do things in a more efficient manner and probably fine tune what I'm already doing, but not in a way that, compromises any sort of like, I'm not going to be doing, paid reviews or anything like that. But just in the stuff that I'm already doing, finding ways to perhaps be more efficient at what I'm doing, and to try to pay a little bit more attention to the bottom line, but in a way that I stay, very true to myself. So, that's just one thing I was thinking. I do need to put a little bit more attention into that, which I think will help guide some other projects and some ebooks and stuff along those lines. But then also, there are some locations that I visited for the first time last year, both within Death Valley as well as in Utah. And I'm really looking forward to getting back to those places. So that to me is something that's very exciting to look forward to.
Do you have any plans for new ebooks coming out in 23?
I think for the most part, it'll be the smaller ones, kind of like what we've talked about, where
Right.
it'll be the handwritten journals along with the images. And those ones, I haven't quite decided exactly how I'll go about doing that. Ultimately, there'll be a zine toward the end of the year. But some of the other topics I have in mind, I think are going to be more long-term, kind of like the three that I already have. I have, those are going to be more of long-term projects that'll probably be maybe not next year, but maybe the year after that, when I can really just sit down and put all of the thoughts into words and kind of make things laid out in a way that makes the most amount of sense.
Thinking more towards next year that I wanted to do this year was presentations and like webinars, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd really like to get one of those started off too. Just start planning that, because I know that my first go at it would be through Nature Photographers Network. David and I had already talked about it, and he was like, "Yeah,
there's a good format there, a good place. There's a good audience there. That would be a good one."
Yeah. Plus, it'll give me the opportunity to learn as I go. It's low stakes over there. A lot of people I know aren't going to be heavily critical about it, per se.
Mm-hmm.
So I think I want to push out at least one presentation, run that kind of gamut around some of the local photography clubs. Is that something that you've ever considered doing, or?
I did a little bit of that in the past, as far as like, talking to some of the local groups. I haven't done anything like that online, which I know that that's been something that I've seen a lot of photographers do, especially with some of the photography conferences that were doing primarily online stuff during the pandemic, where photographers were doing presentations and sharing their work and teaching that way. To me, I think I would have a hard time with that, and I'm not quite sure why. In person's no big deal for me. Maybe if it was like a really big, scary looking audience, maybe that would be a little different. But in the ones I've done in person, it's always been just fine. But I think doing the ones online, I see that for whatever reason being a bit difficult. Maybe it's because of not really getting much of a response. It's just like talking into an abyss kind of a thing.
Yeah, but you do that with YouTube.
I do, but it's different. Because I think the way, like for example, when I'm in the field, it's different, because it's just like a little clip I record as I'm just wandering around or whatever, because I'm talking about something in particular. The in the studio videos, those are tough. Those are actually really, really tough to do. Because if anything like derails my train of thought, I just freeze up. I can't recover. So I just hit like stop and like start over again from the beginning. And that's a tricky one. Actually, one of the things I've learned to do for the in the studio videos is I'll just take a few bullet points, and sometimes even like the first few words of a sentence to like kick off a topic, I'll write those on a sheet of paper, and then I'll tape it to the lens hood, so it's hanging underneath, so I can like look down at that. But the moment that my mind goes astray, like there's no coming back from that. So I think that would be more difficult to do live in a sort of online sort of presentation.
Interesting.
Yeah. And actually connecting back to the whole thing about like the paid reviews and stuff, any sort of videos I make on a particular product, those are really tough to do. And I think some people, it's easy for them to do that, but for me, it's really tough. And I think it's just like the lack of any sort of response and just trying to maintain that train of thought. When I'm in the field and I'm doing the videos in the field, you'll see that if I'm ever talking to the camera, I'm usually walking.
Yeah.
Because for whatever reason, if you're walking, the mind works easier. If I'm just sitting there and trying to talk to the camera, it's really tough to do.
Now, with your YouTube come next year, would you ever consider doing any kind of sponsored content, especially given that you would want to put money as a higher stakes, so to speak?
No, I would never do that, because for me, it's just there's so many difficult things that come with that, and so that's why I have no desire for the whole like ambassadorship or anything like that. I just feel like it compromises so much, and yeah, there's no way I'd go down that road. I know that first,
even if a company like Chamonix would come to you and offer you something, given the fact that you have worked with their brand, with their cameras, that you have that experience, that it is already coming as a more genuine review, so to speak.
I still wouldn't.
Interesting.
I'm happy to show in the field the stuff that I love to work with, and I'm happy to talk about it. But the moment it's under the context of this is some sort of paid relationship, it changes the dynamic of things. It changes the expectations, and it does very much limit the freedom to talk about, the downsides of certain things, So it's something that it changes the dynamics of it, and kind of like also what we've talked about in the past. It makes it into work. Whereas before, because I still need to do, I'll be doing a review on the Chamonix Alpinist X camera, but it'll just be, sharing my thoughts based on my experience in the field. But if that was in any ways a sponsored or paid video, it would feel completely different from my own standpoint. And what you wouldn't see is how many takes it would take for me to try and record it if it was not done on my own free will. It would it would make the process so much more difficult. So yeah, even the companies that I really do enjoy their product, I still don't really have any desire for like the whole like, sponsorship or ambassadorship or anything like that. To me, it doesn't feel right to me.
Yeah, because I could definitely see doing one with Chamonix, at least for me specifically. I could see doing a partnership with Chamonix, and I could see doing a partnership with like Ilford, just because they're two companies that I've been using their products for a few years now, and they're products that I believe in, that I think that the companies themselves are doing well for the film community, that kind of thing. So on like an ethical standpoint, I can definitely recommend them, whether I'm getting paid by them or not. And I think that's a big difference that a lot of photographers who have a platform don't necessarily abide by those same principles, like we had mentioned, that they just jump around to highest bidder. Okay, you're going to offer me this camera, 3 lenses, and $2,000 to say your product's the best. Well, okay. And then up the ante for the next one, kind of thing.
Yeah. And that's also why, like, when I do a video on a product, which is not common, but I'll usually start it with a full disclaimer saying basically something along the lines of, I paid full price for this. This is in no way sponsored by the company. They don't even know I'm recording this. I do all that just to, I think it does give a bit more credibility as well, because there are so many. I think we're accustomed to the fact that if you see someone doing a review on a product or whatever, you think in the back of your mind, oh, they're probably being paid to do that.
Yeah.
This is part of some sort of sponsorship. I'm being manipulated here in one way or another. And so that's why I always start with that disclaimer. And I do think that people appreciate that. And even if it was like if you were doing I don't know, like some sort of project teaming up with Chamonix, for example, or Ilford, I do think that if it was known that, it was a sort of a, I hate the word collaboration. I I really don't like that
A
word.
professional collaboration. There you go.
If it was one of those things, I think people would look at it, and I don't think they would hold it to the same degree as if it was just a person who enjoys something, even though it is something that you enjoy. You love Ilford, you love your Chamonix, but I think people would view it differently when they know that it is in some form of partnership, because it changes the motivations.
Which I think goes back to the whole idea that we are constantly being advertised to. Like,
oh yeah,
the rate of advertisement. It was funny because I was over at my cousin's house last week after we had recorded, and I was playing around with her son, and I forget what. Oh, he was watching a video on YouTube, and an ad popped up, and I just made like a sideways comment of, "Oh yeah, you're gonna have to get used to a lot of those in your life because it's even gonna get even worse than it already is."
yeah,
And just thinking about that and like the future going forward of how much further are they going to keep pushing advertisements into our lives? And I think that's where a lot of people start to lose trust in even more of the reputable influencers or YouTubers or whatever you want to consider them, when their intentions aren't necessarily laid out on the line for all to see.
yeah. And there's other things too. Like my wife and I were watching. I forgot what we were watching, but we were watching something that came up, and there was just a close up shot within the show of a printer.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, that's product placement.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then she's like, oh yeah, it probably is. But then they proceed to like try and work that printer into it. And just in the back of my mind, I'm like, all right, well, this whole thing is just, this whole segment on this show is just created around the product placement. And it just was so, even though it was done about as well as one could, but at the same time, I'm just like, I'm just being advertised here right now. This is very blatant product placement. And now I'm losing, like now I'm losing trust on this show that I was watching. And it does also make me wonder, what's going to happen later down the line. I almost feel like the whole influencer thing is starting to get played out. But I also don't know where else they're going to go with this stuff.
Yeah, that reminds me too. I was watching Down to Earth with Zac Efron, and just watching the latest season, all the product placements and how obviously noted they could be. Like they have a Hyundai's new electric vehicle, the Ioniq 5 or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
And they're talking about that. Oh, we're going all electric this show. And then they do a panning drone shot, and all the cars behind them are Kia Tellurides, all gas-powered cars. I'm like,
yeah,
all right. And then you have different things of, you see they're sitting at a dinner table with these people that they're interviewing or whatever, and everybody has the same blue-colored Brita water bottle. I'm like, well,
yeah,
there's another one.
It just takes you right out of it.
Yeah, it does. It just, I mean,
Yeah.
I get it, especially for this. At least the products are in line with their values, or at least what they're trying to value for the show, of like conservancy and environmental awareness and that kind of thing. But at the same time, when it just becomes so obvious, it's like, come on, you could do better than that.
Yeah. And do you think there's going to be, as perhaps a response to all the ad stuff, even more interest? And this is something we talked about a little bit in the past, but the sort of content where people are willing to pay for the specific sort of content to be free of ads, and to to support the creator? Do you think we're going to move increasingly in that direction, or do you think it's also going to just be like everyone's going to be tired of paying for stuff regardless? It's tough to see where we're heading with all this.
I think it's going to be a harsh combination. People are going to have to be really, really picky with what they choose. So another movie that I happened to watch this past weekend was The Lighthouse, that had Willem Dafoe and Robert Pattinson in it.
Mm-hmm.
Really good movie. Well, interesting movie, I should say. But in order to watch it, I had to get a subscription to Showtime through Hulu. So now, not only would I have had to have paid, the $10.99 a month for Hulu, on top of $10.99 a month for Showtime to watch one movie.
Yeah.
So I just did like the little trial and then canceled it because I'm canceling Hulu anyway. So I canceled both of them right away. But still, it gets to the point where all I wanted to do is watch this one movie. Why do I have to go through two separate subscription services to watch it?
Yeah.
It's because then at that point, you may as well just have regular cable because you're paying just as much. Like the whole idea behind subscription services for shows, for movies, was, oh, it's so much cheaper. But now you look at Disney Plus and they're upping their price from, I think, $7.99 up to $10.99. And the $7.99 tier is going to be including ads.
Yeah.
So what's the point? I don't want to have to sit through ads and be advertised to when I am paying you for this service already.
Yeah.
So I think people are going to be, just like how I am right now, I am very picky on what I'm subscribing to anymore. And if I can't watch what I want it to watch and I can't get a free trial with it, well, whatever, it's not that important.
Yeah. So we had another question over on the Discord, or a topic suggestion, having to do, speaking of movies, of influences from movies. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so this topic suggestion is from Peter McCabe, I believe. I'll put a link for his website in the show notes, as usual. And he had asked, has your photography been inspired by cinematography in movies, like the open landscapes of the John Ford Western era, or modern films like Legends of the Fall, or the assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford? Personally, he finds cinematography in film as a source of inspiration, or a boot in the butt to get out and create. And for me, I don't watch a ton of movies that would inspire me to get out. Like most of the movies that I watch, or TV shows even that I watch, are like the Marvel or Star Wars, more of the fantastical kind of movies, which kind of just makes me want to go see if I can jump off this roof and fly, more so than photograph.
Yeah.
Probably not the best idea before the holidays coming up, but
Yeah.
But I'll look back at, say, The Revenant with Leonardo DiCaprio, which was a wonderful movie. One of my favorites, perhaps in the past 5-6 years, however long it's been out. That's a movie that would actually inspire me to get out and explore and want to be in nature and be in the woods. Even the Lighthouse that I had mentioned, where it's just two people isolated on a little island. Just the idea of that just makes me want to get out and be in nature. So I think it all depends on the type of movie that I'm watching. The rare instances where I am watching some kind of nature-themed documentary or something where that's going to be played in more heavily. But on the day-to-day, I don't really get a ton of inspiration from entertainment like that. I mean, I know some people. There's a photographer, I think his name is Daniel Lan. I could be wrong on that, but I'll again put a link in the show notes. he was mentioning how he was heavily inspired by Lord of the Rings. And you also hear like Simon Baxter, who is constantly referencing the trees and the faces in the trees from the Lord of the Rings and all of that. And I don't get that.
I don't either. I could honestly say that although I certainly appreciate a very well done movie, I can't think of a single situation where I've drawn inspiration or anything else from them. I will say that working with photography, working with composition, working with, I should say probably, paying attention to lighting, stuff like that, it makes me appreciate movies based on my own experience of creating things. So there might be a movie where a particular camera angle, or maybe they stay on a particular shot for an especially long time to sort of drive the point home, or something about the composition, stuff like that. I think I probably have a greater appreciation for versus if I was not into photography. But I can't think of a particular case where, I don't even think of movies when I'm out shooting photos. It doesn't inspire me to go out into nature. It doesn't inspire me like that. Probably I might draw more inspiration from reading, and again, it's not going to be a direct thing, but just in the way that things are described. If it's a really good writer, if they're very good about, describing their surroundings. Sometimes if I'm out on a backpacking trip, for example, I might think about things in terms of like, how would I describe this if I was a writer? It makes me perhaps pay attention to my senses a little bit more, but not from movies. And I'm not exactly sure why. I know that some people do, but just not as much for me.
Sometimes I'll think towards like video games that'll, like right now I'm playing through God of War Ragnarok, and last night when I was playing, they had these little creatures, literally just mushroom creatures that were like humanoid. Mm-hmm. And it just made that connection to nature for some reason, of like, oh, I could go out and make a series of photographs on like these mushrooms that I find throughout like the spring and everything. So
yeah,
sometimes there's sparks of ideas there, and sometimes there's just a yearning that's exemplified for me to go out into nature. But for the most part, I just not that kind of individual.
Yeah. And also like my wife and I only recently subscribed to Disney Plus. So we're watching the first season of The Mandalorian right now.
Okay, yeah.
And so of the various scenes that were filmed in Death Valley, or at least, background scenes where they put CGI over it and stuff like that, we'll be watching it, and then I'll say to my wife, oh, that's Death Valley right there. And so in her mind, it's some remote area, but I'm like, it's the viewpoint's just out of view to your right. Like, it's not as exotic of a scene as it would look. I do enjoy, being able to recognize locations I'm familiar with in a movie. So that's kind of cool. And then when I head back there, I'll just, picture like these, from some abandoned mine, like these like little red eyes peering out at me or whatever,
Yeah.
But yeah, it is cool to be able to recognize the areas and have some degree of context, even though it does take away a little bit from the movie, when you do know the true location. It's kind of, takes away from the fact that, this is some alien world or whatever. It takes you out of the story a little bit. I hope you enjoyed our creative banter. You can learn more about Cody's work by visiting his website, codyschultz.com. And you can find my work at benhorn.com. For further discussion, join us at patreon.com/creativebanter. It's a place where we can interact with you, the listener. And although we greatly appreciate those who contribute by joining a tier, discussions are open to everyone, whether you're a paying member or not. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you around next time.